Ready to do our next talk here. We're going to have Dr. Dunn, or Mr. Dunn, sorry, I apologize. I forget his terminal degree in the arts. Mr. Dunn will be presenting his student.
Yeah, so I'm Christian Dunn, I'm one of the graphic design professors, and this is Riley Abston. She's going to be presenting a book that she designed from Fall Graphic Design 1, which is our Intro to Typography class. So, Riley, take it away.
Thank you. Hey everybody, my name is Riley, and like Christian was saying, I am a graphic design student here at JSU, and today I'm going to be walking you through some of the concepts behind my book design. So I just want to start off by asking, does anybody know what book this is, or does anybody recognize the title? It's okay if you don't. Alright, well, it is the second novel of the Sherlock Holmes novels, and it's written by Arthur Conan Doyle. It takes place in 1888, and it's written in John Watson's perspective. So the very first thing that you have to do whenever you're starting to do a project is you have to do a lot of research. I've learned in graphic design that if you're not learning new things, you're learning how to do new things. So that's always a pleasure. But since it's a book design, the way that you do research is you simply just read the book, right? So I went through the book and I just made sure to know any kind of significant events, any kind of clues. It is a mystery novel after all. I made notes about different personalities, about different characters. I even drew some images. And so you can see right here, these are some of the notes that I took that I just scanned in and put on my website here. So if you're ever interested, you can actually come in and see these different things. So once you read the book, you start to get a general idea of what's going on, different characters, different moods and tones. And so one thing that I noticed right off the bat is that Watson and Holmes have very contrasting personality traits. One's very clean, very organized, very scientific, and one is very wild, very unique, and very quirky. And so I knew that I wanted to stick with that, and I wanted to stick with typography. And so knowing that, I moved forward and started to make some mood boards. So I went to Google and Pinterest, of course, and I started looking at book covers, albums designs, movie posters, just titles in general, game design, even pictures with color palettes that I thought I might like and that might fit the book design. So a lot of research, a lot of playing around. This is probably just like an eighth of the stuff that I actually scrolled through. But once you do the research, you can start to establish a goal. Goals are really important in projects because if you don't have a goal, you don't know what you're working for, you don't know what you're striving to accomplish. My goal was pretty clear though. I really liked how those two personalities clashed, the contrast between the two major characters. So my goal was to demonstrate and emphasize that difference using typography. That leads us to part one of the book design. So does anybody recognize those terms or know what those terms mean on the screen at the moment? Other than the art professors in here? No? That's totally okay. Basically, it is just really fancy graphic design language, all stuff that has to do with readability and if you can read text. All that stuff is really important, but it's also a lot of information that you can do a whole separate presentation on. That's not what I'm here to talk to you about today. What I'm here to talk about to you is basically fonts and typefaces in general, and also just the layout of the page and how I use those things to accomplish my goal. So for the book, I settled upon 3 different fonts that I was going to stick to. I wanted to keep the book super clean. This is, again, Watson's book, right? It's his perspective. So I wanted to keep it looking and feeling just like any other published work, another novel. So I stuck with this font right here at the top. It's nice, clean, simple, nothing super fancy to it. And then I found 2 other fonts that I thought would complement that original font and that also mimicked the works from the 1800s that I was looking at, newspapers specifically, that I could use for chapter titles, page titles, headers, numbers, anything like that. I also, at the same time, started to develop just a general sense of how I wanted to lay out the page. All the spacing is important. Again, I just kind of was going for the feel and the tone of how I interpreted the story. And so this was the main kind of page for just general text, and then based off of that, I went and designed a chapter title page, leaving space for like a graphic, a chapter title, and then the rest of the type. So once you get that established, you can start to plug in all your information. So this is kind of a final result of what you would get. You can see it's very clean, very organized, nothing super messy about it. This little chapter title right here, this little graphic, it looks super complicated, but I promise you it's not. All it is a number in a grid system. So you would take a number and place it over a square, and then any time that it overlaid, so areas like this, I would just cut it out because you don't need it, right? If you do that 9 times and put all those squares together, you get a really abstract little piece like this right here on the right. So that was cool to work with. The way that I saw it, the grid acted like a magnifying glass. So it's a mystery novel, it's like clues. This magnifying glass lets you see specific details of each number, kind of playing into that mystery aspect. And then to give it this final look, I just put CH for chapter and O2 for the chapter number and scooted it on over and got my final result right there. So I did this for all the chapters, and then that kind of led into a style that I was able to develop, and I got to do a table of contents page, again mimicking that style, but also referencing the 1800s newspapers that I was looking at. And then with some more exploration, I was able to come up with a title page and eventually a cover that matched Watson's scholarly attitude and just way of thinking. And so right here you can see we have a very strong fundamental base of a book design that we can start to further lay our typography and experimental type with. So that leads to part 2, which is designing the story. So this is where typography comes in and how I wanted to emphasize different personalities, locations, and also the passing of time. Typography is an interesting thing. Basically, all it is taking a word and making it illustrate something or make a feeling just based on how it looks. So an example of that I have for you, if you just want to think of a random word, it can be whatever word you want. For me, I'm going to use the word potato. You want to make the word as weak as possible, right? So the way that I did that, I placed it in the center of the page. I made the lines super thin. There's nothing there to support it. It's just floating in space. The letters are not touching each other. There's no support anywhere, right? Say I wanted to make it seem strong or seem heavier. All you have to do is increase the stroke, maybe make the letters touch, and even move the word down to the bottom of the page to make it seem like it's heavier, and you get something kind of like this. You can also push that a little bit further. Say you take the same word, like a potato, but you want to emphasize nature, maybe make it a little bit more organic. You can do that by changing the color, but also changing the letter form, and you get a completely different feel and look from the word. So I did exactly what I did to this potato, to our 2 major characters. Mr. John Watson, he had 3 emotions throughout the whole story. He was either normal, just going about his day, he was angry at Sherlock Holmes, or he was falling in love with this girl that he had met. And so, using the same principles that I just did with the potato, I developed this system to show how Watson's normal, how he's angry. I used bold because it's a little bit more aggressive than just the normal type. And then when he was falling in love, I used blue italics because to me that symbolizes more like handwriting, penmanship, anything like that, right? It's a little bit more intimate, a little bit more special than just this plain font. And then we get to our complicated part, which is Mr. Sherlock Holmes, who does not convey a single emotion throughout the whole story. So, how do you navigate that, right? He gives a whole bunch of ideas about life, science, I mean, you name it, he knows every kind of topic possible. So, he's a very quirky, very funky kind of dude. I wanted to try to find a type that matched that, and I came up with this, which is nice and all, but it doesn't seem to do him justice. It doesn't seem like it does enough. So I went out and I found several more fonts, and by several, I mean like over 20 different fonts for this one project. And I call them puzzle pieces, if you will. I used these different fonts to build my own version of Sherlock Holmes, and I was able to paint and kind of illustrate his ideas in this kind of unique and organic way compared to Watson's style. And once you combine all those from Watson and also Sherlock Holmes, you start to get a really interesting mix of book pages. You can also use typography to show location and time, so how it passes. basically how I used it, I physically moved words across the page just to add some rhythmic motion, kind of like a poem, so that you're not just reading plain old sentences. It helps get the reader engaged a little bit more, perhaps slow their pace down so that they have to read it a bit slower, pay more attention to it, right? So you can also use words and make shapes to illustrate scenes. So if you're looking through a keyhole, perhaps you can make the type look like a keyhole. Which leads us to part 3, which is where I wanted to start making my book really interactive. So, book is fun and all, but it's a mystery novel. It feels like it should be more hands-on than what I was able to accomplish with just the type. So the way that I did that was immediately, what comes to mind, was the clues. I went and I illustrated clues so that whenever they were mentioned in the book, it would appear on the left-hand side of the page, kind of like a toolkit. So anytime a clue was found, maybe it was like a paper, that little icon would show up in the bottom left corner, and then it would also be highlighted and marked inside the book so that you could see it. It was almost like Sherlock Holmes had come in and made the notes himself in the book, kind of to help the reader as a teacher. I did the same thing as a similar idea with Doodles, because he seemed like the kind of person who would not only make notes in a book, but also needlessly illustrate in the book as well. So with that, we have established a typeface for Sherlock Holmes, but also a handwriting style for Sherlock Holmes. And since I did that for him, why not do that for Mr. Watson as well, right? So if you remember those blue italicized words, I changed that, took those out completely, and I started to write all those pieces of text on sticky notes. I kid you not, I wrote every single one on sticky notes. And I'll show you right here. They are all in here, and they're loose in the book, attached like so, which gave me the idea to start putting inserts inside the book to make it more engaging. So anything handwritten, I did by hand, and then I scanned it in, if I scanned it in at all. A lot of these are original copies in the book. So I started to design pieces of the story. So anytime that Sherlock Holmes took notes, if he saw some clues and wanted to make note of any kind of lettering like you see right here, maybe he had a translation, maybe he picked up pictures or wrote down an address for somebody, I made sure that all that was loose inside the book for the reader to pick up. So also, if they were reading newspapers or reading a book, I made sure to take all that type that they were giving to us as readers, and I just made it look like a newspaper. So nothing over here is changed from the book. They're the same sentences from the story. They're just formatted to look like a newspaper. Which is a perfect example right here is the telegraph. It's just one single sentence from the story, but it looks like a telegraph. So I did that with evidence, I did it with letters. I even put my thumbprint on envelopes for extra texture and also to add to the story. Anytime that Holmes mentioned like a book and also music, I just made sure to include that as well, obviously inspired by the time period that was set in. The way that I kept that organized was anytime that I replaced sentences with an insert, I would just put a little figure number so that people could find it from the book and also from the loose inserts. So that pretty much wrapped up my design there, but I had to double check myself and kind of stop in my tracks because after hearing all that, who would be intimidated and scared to pick up that book in fear that all these inserts would fly out? Yeah, I'm a clumsy person. I know personally all these would be flying across JSU's campus. So I had to consider the audience and I had to consider the use of the book. So I ended up designing a catalog which would list all the different inserts and where they're located inside the book to kind of put a nice little bookend on the end of the story and also just to give the reader a sense of security if they accidentally drop the book. Yeah, but that's pretty much the end of my book design. I know it's a whole lot, but basically, if anything, I know most of y'all are not going to go out and design books. You may not look at books any different, may not look at type any different, but something that I got out of this was you start with a really basic, simple idea, and you can go and make your own book out of it. You can start making newspapers that existed in the 1800s. You never know where you're going to go, and it's just really fun to put your time and energy into stuff like that. So thank you for your time, and I hope that made sense.
We've got time for maybe one question.
What did you, and I'm sorry, what did you use to do your presentation?
So I made a website using ReadyMag. It's just a website builder, yeah. So I've used websites like I don't know, Wix and different websites. I don't know. This one I just saw a bunch of templates where you could have things moving. I'm like, I have a bunch of interactive stuff, and so I cranked this out over the past couple weeks and got it ready for y'all to see. Thank you.
All right, we're going to move right on to our next speaker. Thank you so much. We've got Ashley Himmer.